Well, President Trump's tax plan promising big benefits for individuals. Of course, as we just heard, cutting the top tax rate from 39.6%, actually more with the Obama tax, to 35%. Joining me now to discuss all of this, the King's College economics professor Brian Brenberg and the Wall Street Journal's Main Street columnist Bill McGurn. And I wonder how Main Street will take all this. Bill, what do you think?
I think Main Street should be very happy. If you pull back a little and look at the general themes, lowering the burden, making things simpler, which is a big deal for a lot of small businesses and people struggling out there.
You can hold this up. That's the postcard tax form.
I used to pay the Hong Kong taxes.
Here, maybe you can put it up on the screen there. This is what apparently you would have to fill out. It's only about 15 lines long. This was from the GOP plan last year. But you think Americans will like this?
They'll like that, and the growth is the most important thing. And I think people are missing for Main Street, for these workers, for the people that are struggling, and we know there's a lot of people out there. It's not just the tax cut, the doubling of the standard exemption. Anytime the government wants to let people keep more of what they earn, I'm for it. But what they really benefit, if you're struggling and you're down at the lower end of the economy, you need a growing economy. There's no program, not even tax cuts of the government returning your money, that will make your life better than the growth that each year is compounded in your paycheck and so forth going through. And that's what we haven't had since we've had this anemic 2% average. And
Brian, we have had growth after a major tax cut plan before. Back in the 1980s, we had the Reagan tax cut plan. Mnuchin and Cohn were talking about that today, saying not since then have we had a tax plan like this. Look at what happened to the growth rate in that era. From 1981 until 1989, we had a couple of slow years there. In fact, we had a recession in '82 as a result of what they were doing at the Fed. But it wasn't until 1983 that the tax cuts kicked in. That year, the economy grew 4.6%. The next year, it grew 7.3% and went on to grow not less than 3.5% for the rest of Reagan's term.
And the reason that Main Street cares about those growth numbers is because they translate into hiring and job creation and wage growth. If you look at what Americans care about, they want better jobs, they want higher pay, and they like this growth story. And you see the president, you see the White House very clearly prioritizing the growth story. Now, there's the question of deficits, and we've got to talk about that. But the White House is saying we want growth first. We think people will like that. It'll get the economy moving. It'll put money back in people's pockets, and that's a good thing for America.
And the simplification idea is the rates coming down are extraordinary. You go from 7 separate brackets to 3 brackets. Tremendous simplification. You have the end of the death tax, the end of the AMT tax, the minimum tax, which catches millions of people. It's a dramatic thing, but is it doable? Will Congress? We even heard a Republican, Orrin Hatch. Of course, he's kind of a doubter, shall we say, of the supply side theory. He's already come out sort of against it.
Look, taxes, as Mr. Mnuchin said, it's a big deal. Mr. Cohen, it's a hard thing on every one of these propositions, these rates, these cuts. Everyone's going to be contested and traded off against different things. Some will be traded off against deficit. You know, what kind of spending cuts can you make to balance it? That's normal in this kind of legislation. That's what makes it big. But the orientation is great. And I'll say one other word for Main Street. The corporate tax cuts, they ought to be thought of as something that helps Main Street. You know, I lived overseas.
Although it plays into Democratic propaganda.
On the surface, but Republicans shouldn't be afraid of that. Look, I lived overseas. When you're overseas, you recognize, most of these places are smaller economies, that they need investment and they need their tax structure to be competitive. And that's why a lot of American companies are going overseas. So instead of shaming a carrier or something, we'll do a lot better if they don't go overseas because the tax rates are here. Not only that, we attract other foreign investment and a lot of American cash that's over there that could go to expanding factories and all sorts of things.
We saw that to little Ireland. Ireland has a 12.5% corporate rate.
Everyone knows this except for us.
Corporations went to Ireland. Why? Because of the tax rate.
We're uncompetitive on the corporate side, and working people pay the price.
Now, you asked whether we could pay for the tax cut. A lot of people object to that phrase, paying for a tax cut, because it's our money. We shouldn't have to pay for it twice. But Mnuchin, our Treasury Secretary, spoke to that point early, whether or not it'll pay for itself. Let's play the tape and get your reaction.
We are determined to move this as fast as we can and get this done this year. This will pay for itself with growth and with reduction of different deductions and closing loopholes.
Do you believe that?
That's pretty optimistic. It will pay for some of itself. You're going to get growth in the economy. That is going to increase tax revenue. The hit's not going to be as big as critics say, but it would take enormous growth in the economy to fully pay for these tax cuts. I think that's self-defeating, by the way. The point of cutting taxes is not to raise more revenue. The point of cutting taxes is to put money in people's pockets. How do you balance this out? You cut spending. The problem is nobody's talking about real cuts to spending. Right. When you talk about this kind of tax cut with real spending reform,
a lot of people have just given up, saying it's impossible to cut spending.
Categorically rejected. I think Republicans have an opportunity here to say, we're going to put money back in your pocket and we're going to shrink government, make sure it's spending properly, and that's going to get the economy growing for the long term. Why is that not more on the table? If you want to make a revolutionary reform, do that.
Bill, as we heard earlier, we already have Democrats, both Pelosi, former Speaker Pelosi, and Chuck Schumer, the head of the Democrats in the Senate, saying this is all about the rich. Donald Trump himself will benefit by getting rid of the AMT. But there's another fact I want to bring up from the Reagan administration. I don't mean to keep harping back, but it was an experiment. We had a petri dish, which was the Reagan tax cuts. Under Ronald Reagan, real income, yes, the rich did quite well. They were up 12.2% during the Reagan administration. That's the richest 20%. But look at the left side. The poorest 20% increased 12%, their income, their real income under President Reagan. So all parties, a rising tide lifts all boats.
You don't help the poor by attacking the rich. And in fact, the opposite to those numbers are when you don't have relief and you have these high taxes, all the gains go to the very top. Very few in the bottom go. So they were probably saying the exact same thing when Reagan was proposing these cuts years ago. Nothing's changed. And they haven't learned from it.
And Brian, the other great thing about America, when you have incentives in the economy, in a free market economy, incentives by lowering tax rates, you have people moving between classes. You have poor going into the middle class. You have middle class becoming rich. That's the essence of what makes our economy so dynamic.
You want to increase mobility and dynamism, and the way you do that is you make it easier to do things like start and grow a business. Critics are going to call this trickle-down economics. That's wrong. When companies have more money in their pockets, they invested in plants, they invested in workers. It's organic growth. That's how the administration should be selling this. It's systematic, organic growth from the bottom up.
And, Bill, it's not just businesses. It's individuals. Individuals will work harder if they think that the payoff at the end of the day is greater. That is, if the incentives, if you're able to keep more of the money that you earned, you'll work harder.
I have a friend just talking to whose husband owns a small business in Connecticut. The nightmare that they go through filling out tax forms and health care and so forth for a small entrepreneurial business is just is staggering what they have to go through. And they don't have the luxury of a big company of being able to move to Florida or Texas or somewhere like that. Their customers are all there. This can be so liberating for these people.